Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Indian occupying forces have martyred two more unarmed Kashmiri civilians in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The two Kashmiri youths were killed during a military crackdown in the Bijbehara area of the Anantnag district. Indian occupation troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked the Indus Special status in August last year. A group of 7 Tory MPs have relaunched a group named the Conservative Friends of Kashmir, aimed at campaigning for self-determination in Kashmir. In a statement, the group said it advocates to end human rights abuses in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They rejected the severe criticism from pro-Indian members of the Tory party. The United States has imposed new sanctions on 2 Iranian individuals and 4 entities. The target list includes Iranian judges, Shiraz Revolutionary Court, and many prisons. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said all designated individuals and entities are responsible for gross violations of human rights. North Korea has expressed regret over the killing of a South Korean citizen, saying he was killed to contain the potential spread of coronavirus. In a briefing, Seoul's National Security Advisor says North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un sent a letter to South Korean President Moon Jae-in to apologize for the incident, saying he hopes the confidence between the two sides is not damaged. The global cases of coronavirus have exceeded 32 million and claimed over 980,000 lives. The outbreak continues to overwhelm India as another 1,141 have died in the past 24 hours, while over 86,000 people have tested positive. The country's death toll has crossed 92,000 mark with over 5.8 million infections. In Pakistan, 7 COVID-19 patients died overnight, taking the tally to 6,444. And Bayern Munich have won the UEFA Super Cup, beating Sevilla 2-1 after extra time at the Puskás Arena in Hungary. With this Super Cup win, the UEFA Champions League winners completed a quadruple, winning the domestic league and cup double last season. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's start the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where occupation forces have martyred 2 more unarmed civilians. The 2 Kashmiri youth were killed during a military crackdown in the Bijbehara area of the Anantnag district. Indian troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked the Indus Special status in August last year. The occupied valley is under India's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the last 417 days. Meanwhile, a group of 7 Tory MPs have relaunched a group named the Conservative Friends of Kashmir, aimed at campaigning for self-determination in Kashmir. In a statement, the group said it advocates to end human rights abuses in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The group of British parliamentarians includes Paul Bristow, James Daly, Jack Brereton and Steve Baker. They represent constituencies with significant Pakistani populations. The MPs rejected the severe criticism from pro-India members of the Tory party. President of Azad Kashmir, Masood Khan, has expressed gratitude over the relaunching of the Conservatives' Friends of Kashmir. In a related development, Pakistan has hailed the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's role in raising the issues of Palestine and Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a virtual address to an OIC seminar, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shamimud Qureshi said the body raised its voice against Indian and Israeli atrocities through its resolutions and statements. He said New Delhi's continued suppression of unarmed Kashmiris is a great human tragedy and called to resolve the issue under UN resolutions. The Foreign Minister said the OIC platform aims to unite the Muslim world to resolve global Muslim issues under a common strategy. Meanwhile, Afghan security forces say they have killed over 60 Taliban fighters in the eastern Paktika province. A police spokesman, Shah Mohammed, said the group staged coordinated assaults on the Wazahwa district police headquarters. He said Afghan forces repelled the attack and launched airborne and ground counter-offensives. The spokesman said 3 policemen were killed while 6 others sustained injuries. The Taliban have not yet commented. However, the group did claim responsibility for killing Paktika's security chief and his 8 guards last week. The Taliban have blamed Kabul's hardline stance and divisive rhetoric for the delay in talks over the core agenda of the intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha. The Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid says the government's anti-Taliban rhetoric, slander and lies are denting Afghans' trust in the peace process. Mujahid criticized a recently published work by the Afghan government, calling it war literature and a distortion of peace talks. It said certain individuals in the government are polluting the environment of the intra-Afghan negotiations. The spokesperson accused President Ashraf Ghani of calling for a ceasefire while launching fresh attacks on the Taliban. Mujahid said Washington should tell Kabul that the time for propaganda and anti-peace rhetoric is over. Now, the United States has imposed new sanctions on 2 Iranian individuals and 4 entities. In a statement, the U.S. Treasury Department said the target list includes Iranian judges who sentenced a wrestler, Navid Afghari, on September 12th. The list also includes Shiraz Revolutionary Court and many prisons in the country. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said all designated individuals and entities are responsible for the gross violations of human rights. He accused the Iranian government of transforming its system of justice into a cruel system of repression. Iranian authorities had charged 27-year-old Iranian wrestler Navid Afghari with killing a security guard during the 2018 protests in Iran. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow hopes to take new measures to maintain the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In a joint press conference with Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, Lavrov said Russia is cooperating with the participants who adhere to the deal. Lavrov said Moscow will not take into account the illegal and unacceptable unilateral actions by Washington. He said the United States sanctions against Iran will not influence Russia's policy on Iran. Meanwhile, Zarif said both countries have had productive talks on military cooperation. He said the 2 countries can also sign a military contract after Iran's arms embargo is lifted. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guards have unveiled a new naval base near the Strait of HORMUZ. State media quoted the Guards commander as saying the base has been built to control the entry and exit of naval vessels at the entrance of the Gulf. Major General Hussein Salami said this location is one of the country's most strategic defensive points. His remarks come days after a U.S. aircraft carrier passed the waterways to enter the Gulf. In June last year, Iran shot down a U.S. drone over the strait after it allegedly violated its airspace. Meanwhile, Tehran's foreign ministry described Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz's accusations as baseless. In his video address to the UN General Assembly, the king said Iran exploited a 2050 nuclear deal with world powers to intensify its expansionist activities. Now, the 2 biggest Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, have agreed to hold the first elections in Palestine in nearly 15 years. Polls will be scheduled within 6 months under a deal agreed by Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. The factions renewed reconciliation efforts after Israel reached diplomatic accords this month with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The development dismayed Palestinians and prompted their leaders to try to present a united front. Officials from both groups held meetings in Istanbul for the past 2 days. They said the vote will be in stages, starting with Parliament, then electing a new president and finally choosing members of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The rivals have been unable to repair a rift from 2007 when Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip. Now, Bahrain says normalization deal with Israel should lead to end the Palestinian and Israel conflict through a two-state solution. Addressing the United Nations General Assembly, King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa called for intensified efforts to end the conflict in the Middle East. King Hamad said the issue should be resolved through Arab Peace Initiative to establish an independent Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. He said the declaration to establish relations with Israel is a refined message that Bahrain wants fair and comprehensive peace. Hamad's remarks come a day after an Israeli official delegation made the first visit to Bahrain since both countries signed the deal. The Palestinian Authority says it has suffered a 70% drop in foreign aid in 2020 after a 50% drop last year. Officials say the recent normalization deals between the Gulf and Israel have led to a sharp decline in financial support from Arab states to Palestine. Palestinian Finance Ministry in Ramallah says it has received no funds from Arab countries since March. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said most Arab countries did not pitch in the $100 million pledged in the Arab summit. Arab aid during the same period dropped by 85% from $267 million in 2019 to $38 million in 2020. Moving on, the United States has announced more than $720 million in additional humanitarian assistance for Syria. The U.S. Agency for International Development said recent support brings the total amount of aid to Syria to more than $12 billion since 2011. It said the USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance will provide urgently needed food, shelter, medical care, and will support Syrians earn income. The agency said this assistance will bolster coordination and information management for the overall humanitarian response in Syria. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said international community must remain committed to meeting the increasing needs of the Syrian people. He called for holding the Bashar al-Assad regime accountable for its devastating military campaign and brutal disregard for human rights. Meanwhile, 2 civilians have been killed and 12 others wounded in a car bomb attack in northeastern Syria. Turkey's Ministry of National Defense accused PKK terrorists of detonating a bomb-laden car in the town of Thal Halaf. Turkey's military conducted Operation Peace Spring in northeastern Syria to clear it from PKK militants. Ankara said the operation was launched to secure Turkey's borders. The United Nations says lack of funding in Yemen is crippling humanitarian aid operations and pushing the country closer to famine. Criticizing the funding situation, spokesman Stefan Dujarric said 15 out of 41 major UN programs have already been reduced or shut down.
Dujarric said 20 million people in Yemen are facing food insecurity. He said about 2 million children need treatment for acute malnutrition, as 360,000 of them are at risk of dying. The spokesman said 30 more aid and assistance programs will close or reduce services in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, Yemen's President Mansour Hadi has asked for urgent international economic support for the government to face the economic challenges. In a letter to the annual United Nations General Assembly, Hadi said the imposed war on Yemen caused a humanitarian catastrophe in the country. United Nations has declared the humanitarian crisis in Yemen as the worst ever to hit any state.
Now, North Korea has expressed regret over the killing of a South Korean citizen, saying he was killed to contain the potential spread of coronavirus. In a briefing, Seoul's National Security Advisor says North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un sent a letter to South Korean President Moon Jae-in to apologize for the incident, saying it hopes the confidence between the two sides is not damaged. South Korea's National Security Advisor says Kim apologized for disappointing President Moon and other South Koreans. Pyongyang says its troops near the Western Sea border fired over 10 shots against the man intruding into the North's waters. It says the border forces burned the floating material carrying the man after his body disappeared. Earlier, South Korea's defense ministry said it was tightening its military readiness posture in the wake of the killing. Seoul said the military is closely monitoring North's troops' movements to swiftly react to any aggression and to prevent the escalation of tensions. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the global cases of coronavirus have exceeded 32 million and claimed over 980,000 lives. India's coronavirus case tally has surged by over 86,000 to 5.82 million in the past 24 hours. The death toll in the country has climbed to over 92,000 after more than 1,100 died overnight. Details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic have picked up pace once again as record surge in cases has been reported in France, UK and Spain. Health authorities in Spain warned of tough weeks ahead for the residents of Madrid as the country's COVID-19 infections topped 700,000. France Prime Minister has also warned that inaction can lead to repetition of the situation at the peak of the crisis in March. The government has placed Marseille city and surrounding region on the Mediterranean coast on the maximum alert level.
These measures, I'm sure, are difficult, but we are convinced that they are necessary. First, it's about total closures of bars and restaurants, as well as all establishments that welcome the public, unless there are strict protocols in place already.
In Brazil, Rio de Janeiro's world-famous Carnival parade has been postponed as the country grapples with the second deadliest coronavirus outbreak in the world. Governor of Brazil, Sao Paulo, says the state is likely to begin the immunization of its population with China's Sinovac vaccine in mid-December.
In the first lot, there will be 5 million doses of the CoronaVac vaccine to be applied in Sao Paulo. They will now arrive in Butantan laboratory for trials in October. We have to wait for the end of Phase 3, the last phase of the trial, and its results. Also approval from Anvisa Regulatory Authority, but in December, in the second half, we could start immunization.
Deaths in Australia's Victoria State have once again edged up, with 8 dying from the disease overnight. South Korea is considering tighter restrictions during the Chuseok autumn holiday weeks that rise new clusters of coronavirus infections.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 7 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says nearly 800 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said the countrywide death toll stands at 6,444. It said the number of active cases across the country is over 7,800. The ministry said so far 294,000 people have recovered, while 102 patients are on ventilators. Now, the United States state of California says it has contained about half of a massive wildfire ravaging Los Angeles County for nearly a month. Authorities say the Bobcat fire has burnt about 113,000 acres outside Los Angeles. Officials said the largest fire in Los Angeles County history held steady overnight, with about 1,600 personnel currently leading the containment efforts. The Forest Service warned of more hot, dry weather over the weekend that may set back the progress, bringing the Bobcat fire under control. The 2025 season in the United States has killed 26 people in California since August 15, while 10 have died in Oregon and Washington. Authorities say roughly 3.6 million acres have burned in California since the beginning of the year long, with another 2 million acres in Washington and Oregon. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has called for urgent action to improve living conditions for asylum seekers on Greece's Aegean island. The agency called on Europe to continue supporting Greece by offering relocation places for the most vulnerable refugees. The UNHCR lauded Athens for establishing an emergency facility shelter to those displaced from Moria camp. It said around 9,400 asylum seekers left homeless by the fire are now residing in the new government-run site. The United Nations agency estimates that at least 4,000 people on all islands are eligible to be transferred to the mainland immediately. On 10th of September, the Moria Reception and Identification Center was burnt, forcing some 12,000 people onto the streets. Major car makers say they are suing the United States government over import taxes on Chinese parts. The USA and China have imposed border taxes on each other's goods and services as part of a trade war. Tesla is the latest autophone to object to custom duties slapped by the Trump administration and is demanding refunds. The car makers have filed a number of lawsuits in the past few days in the New York-based Court of International Trade. In its filing, Tesla said the tariffs are arbitrary, capricious and abuse of discretion. While Mercedes-Benz said the U.S. government is doing prosecution of an unlimited trade war affecting over $500 billion imports from China. Earlier, the World Trade Organization ruled that the United States tariffs on Chinese goods were inconsistent with international trade rules. A U.S. court has ordered the federal government to delay the ban on Chinese video sharing app TikTok, set to go into effect on September 28. Ruling on an injunction by app's owner ByteDance, the U.S. Federal District Court asked the government to either shelve the ban or file a brief defending its position. The court said it will hold a hearing on the motion on September 27 if the government opts not to postpone the ban. TikTok and ByteDance argue the administration has acted without proper due process and is in violation of the First Amendment. ByteDance has asked for the delays as it seeks governmental approval for its proposed takeover deal with Oracle and Walmart for its U.S. operations. Meanwhile, speaking to reporters in Florida, U.S. President Donald Trump said the decision to approve TikTok deal will hinge largely on the issue of safety.
They're working to see if they can make a deal, and if they make a deal, they'll have to bring it to me, and I'll either approve it or not. To me, safety is the predominant factor, and we'll see if they can do that. But they're moving along, and let's see what happens.
Earlier in August, Trump ordered TikTok to divest its U.S. operations before September 15 in a bid to pressurize Chinese firms over data security concerns. The deadline was extended by a week after positive developments over a potential deal. Now moving on, the European stocks are trading mixed as investors continue to monitor coronavirus developments and the prospects of economic recovery. The pan-European stock 600 have inched slightly above the flat line, with telecoms adding while tech stocks fell. London's FTSE gained fractionally, while Italy's FTSE MIB has shed marginally. Frankfurt's DAX and Paris's CAC 40 have slipped around 0.5%. Earlier, stocks in Asia-Pacific also traded mixed, with Chinese Hong Kong bourses edging lower, while Japanese stocks Seoul's Kospi and Australia's ASX 200 gained. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.